Hey there, welcome back to Earning Mileage. This is Casey Whitener and Jody Keene Smith. We are Clemson Road Creative, and this is our YouTube channel talking to you about the benefits of remote work and our specific approach to redesigning work. So welcome to the show. We're glad to have you here. We've got about 7 or 8 other episodes you can binge if you haven't watched them yet. Don't worry, we'll wait.
So binge worthy.
Yeah, go. We'll wait. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so this episode specifically, though, is a follow-up to our last episode, which was called Say Yes. And in Say Yes, we talked a lot about how managers should be willing to make exceptions for their employees. And Jody made a fantastic point at the end of that show where you talked about how being willing to say yes is partly fueled by knowing what the work actually is. And so this episode is about managing the work, not managing the people. And all of this is part of the work that we've put forward in our book, which is called Redesign Work Volume 1, A Beginner's Guide to Autonomy. And it talks about how we itemize the work into units of actual productivity, actual results. And by doing that, we're not necessarily worried about where the other person is spending their time or how the other person is accomplishing these results. We're just concerned about the actual results. And I think this is maybe an approach for a lot of managers because in the past, we've thought of human resources as managing the humans, right? And making sure the humans were where they needed to be and doing what they needed to be. But really, this is more of a software design approach, which I'll get into in our business example in just a second. But before that, Jody, you've got a civilian example of what it looks like to itemize the work and then give that work to other individuals and trust that they're going to do it. And we're going to come back to trust as a thing too. So give us your example.
Okay, so my approach to planning comes from 2 sources. First, it was being the costume shop foreman for my college theater department. That was what paid my tuition in school. And our costume designer and I, at the beginning of every build period, would make pages and pages of this has to be done, this has to be done, this has to be done, this has to be done. And then we would spend the 8-week build just ticking off those with all of our stitchers. I combined that with when I worked as a DA civilian and was introduced to backwards planning, which is what the military does when they're training for like a deployment or something like that. And so when I decided to torture myself a little because I didn't have enough going on and said, hey, Mobile, Alabama needs a literary festival. They don't have one. Let's create one. And at the time, I had just moved back to Mobile. So, I had been gone for 15 years. I knew no one in the literary community in Mobile because the last time I lived in Mobile, I was an actor and I come back as a writer and they're like, who are you? So I went to a Mobile Writers Guild meeting and was like, hey, I want to start a literary festival. And hey, I don't have any money and I'm not going to fool with money because with money comes all the hoops and the suspicion and the how are you spending this? How are you spending that? I didn't want any of that. I just wanted to share the craft of writing with as many people as we could and to have a day to celebrate that craft, to bring all these writers of every level together. And so I told Mobile Writers Guild and then the Mobile Public Library System, I was like, I want to do this. I want y'all to host it, the library, and give me free space. And I'll bring in all this traffic to your library that day. And they were like, okay, that sounds cool. You run it. We don't want to work. And I was like, all right. So I recruited some volunteers for Mobile Writers Guild and a couple from outside the guild, but still in the literary community, like the literacy programs through schools and things. And so I had my team together and I was like, okay, I have a team. They cannot be motivated by money because we have none. And when I say we have no money, I mean, this is a 0 cost festival. And that what that means is that I had to have people who had specific talents in specific areas. And so the first thing I needed to do was to make my action plan. So I knew what to guide all these volunteers to do. And when you think of a festival, there's a lot of things that go into that. So this is, what year was this? 2019. So this is my crazy backward planning to-do list. And as you can see, I know it's so low tech. I'm so just on top of the technical stuff. As you can see, it's going to be broken in.
I love it though.
Hi. It's going to be broken into different categories of work, like different areas that need to be addressed with the festival. And so, you know, a big one is always publicity. Another one is always programming. Who are we going to get to speak? Who are we, you know, going to get to teach workshops? Another one is who's going to run the festival bookstore, things like that. And so I break all of those kind of big concepts into the tiny, what you see in all of the lines. Like each of that is an individual action that has to be completed. And then for the sake of my volunteers, I actually type it up.
So I just want to point out real quick, you know, you can do that like with a Google Sheets form or like a.
Yes. And it eventually converts into that. I type it all out in a nice little spreadsheet. I know how to use Excel and Google and all of that. But as far as like what all needs to get out of my brain and into words, I'm a pen and paper girl.
Yeah.
That's where it all starts. And then I can look at all of, because this goes on for several pages in this particular bullet journal. So then I can actually organize it into task groups. And then those task groups, those assignments go out to my volunteers via email, because we'll probably meet over the year of planning. And we all live in Mobile. We'll meet actually in person no more than 4 times, because none of us have time for that.
Right.
And I don't, like you said in the intro, I don't care when they do the work. What I do care about is how they do the work, the quality of it, and when the work gets done. So the people that are going to these other nonprofit boards and requesting like, hey, we need $80 to print out some flyers. I care how that approach is made. And so I'm going to make sure that I have a volunteer who feels comfortable with this kind of development, this going out and making the big ask for money and things like that. You know, I'm going to make sure that that person is comfortable with that task and can also present themselves in a welcoming and professional way. I have my like right-hand girl with Literary Festival is brilliant with writing press releases. If I could write a press release as good as she could, I wouldn't do anything else. I would just sit there and write press releases for people and charge them an obscene amounts of money for them. And that's where, and then I go into work tracking mode kind of thing of, you know, I'll look at like my whole calendar and say, okay, we really need that press release by this date. And so like a week out, I'll send her a nice little nudge email and say, hey, how's the press release coming? And she'll, you know, respond back, oh my Lord, it's a week out. You'll have it in 5 minutes. That's how awesome she is. And so she'll turn that over really quickly. Because what I did in the beginning is I feel I did a good job of making my volunteers believe in the possibility of this product. And then after that first year in 2016, then we all recommitted ourselves to this is how we're going to do it. We're going to take all of this work and we're going to break it down so none of us feel overwhelmed and crazy all the time. So we have plenty of time to prepare for this festival, but our one motivation for it was this work is going to have my name on it. All of us individually thought that.
Yeah, so let's break that down a little bit more. So one of the things I think that you did very effectively with this, and the reason I love this as the civilian example, but really it's an example for anybody that's planning a huge project, is that you itemize the work and then you assigned the work to the contributor who is best capable of doing that work. And this is equity. When you recognize what somebody's unique capabilities are and how they can best contribute, you are achieving equity in your team, right?
Yeah.
So we can have a whole other episode on that. So you itemize the work, you say, this is what has to get done. These are the best people to do that actual thing. And then you created a strategy for when you were going to circle back with them and check up on deadlines and milestones. And everybody meets their deadlines and their milestones. This is managing the work. It's not managing the people. And I think what's really important about this kind of transition out of a particular industrial model mindset is that the industrial economy assumed that all workers were interchangeable.
Yeah.
That is simply not true. You have a rock star press release writer. Why would you ask her to do something else when this is the thing that she's really good at, right? So since that's not true, and the industrial economy makes that assumption, we have to believe that the industrial economy way of doing things is no longer correct, right?
Yeah.
Number two, the industrial economy thinks that everybody's going to apply the same amount of effort for every single hour that they're engaged in work. We also know that's not true. Right now, studies are showing that people work actually about 3 of the 8 hours in their workday.
Yeah.
Right. I thought 5. I was being pretty generous. I thought 5, but it's actually about 3. And it turns out that there's just a tremendous amount of idle time in the workday, right? And some of it's like waiting for printers to load, waiting for things to be available, going to meetings, right? All these kinds of things that are just a tremendous waste of time.
Yeah.
So we know that there's this industrial standard 8 to 5, that people work 8 to 5, right? And in actuality, we're not actually working that way. And so why do we continue to manage the work that's coming in and out of our environment using these practices that are archaic, right? That no longer really apply to the environment that we're in. I think the standards that have been set are out of date.
Yeah.
And I think managers just need to understand how they can do it better. And I think you offer that perfect example here of managing the work itself, applying people in collaborator roles, in contributor roles that are going to do the best job at this, and then laying out what the work is going to look like. And they're probably doing this. The managers are probably doing this on a lot of projects anyway. I come from a software implementation background. This is how software implementation projects are run. So in none of this does it take into account whether or not my employee is working full-time, whether or not they've clocked in at 2:00 on a Tuesday afternoon, or whether they're sitting in the movie theater at 2:00 on a Tuesday afternoon. That never occurs to me. Where are they? What are they doing right now? And we've talked before about how we measure things like responsiveness, and we measure results, and we measure contributions to revenue, but we're certainly not measuring the number of hours that people are putting into this work. It's about looking at that work itself as an individual unit, a product of somebody's effort, and saying, yes, we have what we need and we can move forward.
Yeah. And when I say that I break, let's say the programming for Literary Festival. So, it's a one-day festival, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. So, the first task in that, if I was to break down the idea of planning the program for the festival, the first task in that is to break down the unit. Okay, what are our units of time going to be? So I get the organizational structure of what the day is going to look like. And then within all of that is we do a brainstorm and a brainstorm of what local writers do we want to invite for workshops. What are some workshop ideas that we're looking to fill this year as far as the needs of our patrons from the year before? What are who's got a new book coming out? What local author needs a publicity push right now? And then the next step in that is we narrow down the list. The next step is we reach out to potential workshop presenters and speakers. And then, the next step in that is the follow-up. And that's where there's no just general concept of find speakers All the features is broken down, is itemized into individual tasks.
I think
And
you're making this is a really, really important point, because in our last episode, when we talked about saying yes, it may have come across that we didn't care about processes and procedures because we just wanted to throw out the baby with the bathwater, which is exactly not true. In fact, both of us believe in documenting the process from getting from here to there so that anybody can do it, so that anybody with any level of skill can open up this document and follow that step-by-step process. So I think you're making a really important point here. It's not, you're managing people by creating a process. You're still managing the work. You're still creating for them a sort of a map, and then saying, here's your map, now go follow it, right?
Right. And then but the other side of this is, I don't just want zombie volunteers that feel that they cannot innovate within this festival format that we've developed over the 4 years of the festival. I don't want them to be like, I can't do anything until Jody tells me what to do. Because I cannot stand non-independent thinkers. Like,
well, let's put this out there right now, because we're talking to managers right now. The same managers that complain about zombie persons on their team are the same managers who are the bottleneck in decisions getting made, right? So I worked for somebody one time that if we did not send through the draft to her first, then it could not go out, right? Whatever we were sending out could not go out.
I worked for her too.
But she wouldn't get to the draft in time to meet our deadline to be able to send the doggone thing out. So then we would get in trouble for not having sent it out on deadline, except that she was the bottleneck. And so be aware, managers, you can either be the bottleneck because you want your zombie employees, or you can say, I don't want zombie employees. I'm going to step back and let them and give them the autonomy to do this themselves. But you can't have it both ways. You can't be in control and also, having people think for themselves, because the minute they start thinking for themselves, they're going to take control, and you've just got to let it go, man. You got to let it go. So let's talk real tactical about this. We're about 17 minutes. I want to get wrapped up here in the 20-minute range. So we're going to talk tactical. How do you manage work? First, you itemize it. And Jody did a great example of that, right? Break down the big project into smaller chunks. Find the processes that you need. Write those processes down, right? Have documentation for those processes. And if this is the first time you've done it, have the person who's been entrusted to do it write their process down, right? Yeah. You have a plan to achieve this overall outcome you're trying to achieve. And you can put those tasks into categories, right? You can say, these tasks are administrative, these tasks are social media, these tasks are, client facing, however you need to categorize them. And then think about your team and who's got the right skill set for this, right? And then offer those opportunities to your team to complete the work inside those categories. It's not that hard to break the work down and then pass it out. And really, if you think about this from an editorial perspective, you're a newspaper editor, right? And you're standing there and you say, here's all the, here are the 32 things that happened overnight, and I'm going to hand these assignments out to reporters. That's exactly what our current managers need to be doing, but that's not what they do. Instead, what they do is they say, this is your job. You do your job, stay in your lane. And that is no way to be productive here. And especially no way to get your employees motivated and excited about being part of as a contributor, being part of the team.
Yeah. One other example I can think of that, and combining this idea of managing work with allowing your employees to then innovate within that work. At the beginning of the pandemic, when the Cowboy Museum in San Antonio, Texas closed, they decided, well, we need to up our social media game just to keep people thinking about the Cowboy Museum. And they know that we're here, even though they can't come travel to San Antonio right now. And so they decided to put their head of security, this 70-year-old man that walks around in his steel-tip cowboy boots and dressed like a Texas Ranger. They decided to put him in charge of their Twitter account. and I think Instagram also. So he would walk around the museum, this empty museum, and like take pictures of things and then post them and say, "This is a boot." And it was so hilarious in how dry it was, and that this is obviously not a person who's like a whiz at Twitter, that he was a whiz at Twitter. And I was like, who tried to put this old cowboy in charge of social media? But I love it, and it worked, and it caught on like wildfire. Like it went viral.
Yeah.
And that's where I say to managers, like, know what your end state needs to be, and know, the different steps that you're going to need your employees to take to reach that end state, and then, inform them, and then allow them a little bit of space to grow and innovate within, my crazy task list. Everything still gets done, even though I have all these brilliant, happen to be completely like all women. But I have all these women that they know how to get things done in a better way than I could have ever imagined. So
yeah, and so I want to put something else out there too, because volunteer organizations are bad about this. If the task needs to get done and there's a particular deadline for that task, and you decide you want it sooner, do not do it yourself. That is the surest way to undermine your team. Instead, approach the person to whom you have assigned that task and say, is there a chance I can get this a little bit sooner? If not, okay, we can stick to the regular deadline. Remember that the regular deadline was put in place to meet the overall project deadline.
Yeah.
So there's that sense of urgency around moving that deadline up is yours and yours alone. But do not take that task on yourself and do it yourself. When you do that, the people that work for you and with you believe that you don't trust them to get it done. And this is the worst possible way to manage. If you're going to manage the work, manage to deadlines, and when the work comes in, evaluate it for whether or not it's going to do what you need it to do, right? If it's not available on time, right, then find out how it can get available as quickly as possible. And if it is available, but it's not up to your standards, find out how you can get it resolved or revised so that it will meet your standards. But don't duplicate efforts. Don't do the work yourself. And don't think that because those people aren't doing it the way you would do it, that it's not going to get done. Because all of those things are just old managing the people strategies instead of managing the work strategies.
And then take a deep breath, or 12, and try to let go of your control freak ways. This is the hardest thing I do every day of my life. And say, it's okay, Jody, that they're not doing things the way that you want them to do things. Because in the end, the product is going to rock.
Yeah. And it's going to get done. And you just got to trust people to make it work. And those people come back to you year after year to make a bigger and better festival because they trust that you can manage that project. You can manage the work, and you're not going to try to manage them. This has been Earning Mileage. Thank you, Ms. Jody Kane-Smith. You have been tuned into Clemson Road Creative. This was episode 8. We have a book out there. It talks all about how to increase the autonomy in your organization and on your team. It's called Redesign Work Volume 1, A Beginner's Guide to Autonomy. You can get more about us at clemsonroad.com. Of course, you can follow us on the socials, places like Twitter and reluctantly Facebook. And we're glad always to accept any kind of inquiries you have. Simply send an email to info@clemsonroad.com or comment on the video below. Thank you, Jody.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Okay.